The Bond franchise has survived 6 decades, 5 global recessions, 3 near deaths, and a literal pandemic. Tarantino and Spielberg wanted to direct one, both were turned down. Brosnan got fired over the phone, and through all of that, only one of the 25 Bond films actually lost money. 60 years of actor swaps, lawsuits, and bad scripts, and the franchise only stumbled once, at the worst possible time. This is every James Bond movie budget compared to its box office. It's late 1961, and United Artists is already trying to turn Bond into a household name in North America. Newspapers were getting these box sets of Fleming's books, press kits, photos of Ursula Andress. Basically, they wanted you to know who James Bond was before you even walked into the theater. Dr. No opens in the UK, 168 cinemas, makes $840,000 in 2 weeks. Ends up being the 5th biggest movie of the year there. Budget was just $1 million, and it doesn't stop there. The original North American gross was $2 million, but after a reissue with From Russia with Love, that jumps up to $6 million. And they kept reissuing it. Double feature with Goldfinger, anything to keep the momentum going while they made the next one. All told, Dr. No pulls in almost $60 million worldwide. That's 60 times its budget. The first Bond movie didn't just make money, it basically rewrote the Hollywood playbook for what a franchise could be. After that, United Artists doesn't even hesitate. Second film, budget doubled to $2 million. Connery gets a big pay bump too, $100,000 bonus on top of his regular salary. And it pays off. First release, $12.5 million, which is already double what Dr. No made. After reissues, $78 million total, $24 million just from North America. It's not just a hit, it's one of the best reviewed entries in the series. Connery's a star, Bond is everywhere, and they're just getting warmed up. Now here's where it really takes off. They wanted to do On Her Majesty's Secret Service next, but just didn't have time for the Swiss location, so they pivoted to Goldfinger. There's also a whole legal mess going on with Thunderball at this point, just chaos behind the scenes. Goldfinger gets a $3 million budget, which is huge for 1964, and it makes that back in 2 weeks. Guinness Book of Records lists it as the fastest-grossing film ever at the time, $10.3 million in just 14 weeks in the US. This movie is an event. Ends its original run with $23 million in the US, $46 million worldwide. After reissues, again, they loved double features, it ends up with $51 million in the US and $125 million worldwide. And honestly, the way Goldfinger is structured, that's the template for every Bond film after this. By the third movie, Bond isn't just popular, it's a full-blown phenomenon. Thunderball was supposed to be first, but because of that lawsuit, it's the 4th film instead. That lawsuit, by the way, drags on until 2013. Just ridiculous. But the film drops in December 1965, and it's a monster hit. In Tokyo, one theater on opening day makes $13,000. Next day, $16,000. The US total, $63.6 million, with almost 60 million tickets sold. Worldwide, $141 million, blows past all 3 previous films, and it only cost $9 million to make. Nothing could touch Bond at this point. Thing is, critics weren't quite as hot on Thunderball as the earlier ones, but it didn't matter. The Bond brand was bulletproof. People were lining up anyway. Next up, You Only Live Twice. Big premiere, London, Queen Elizabeth II shows up. The film opens in the UK and US the next day, sets an opening record at the Odeon Leicester Square, goes to #1 in the States with a $600,000 weekend, pulls $7 million from 161 theaters in just 3 weeks, and holds the #1 spot for 7 weeks straight. Total worldwide, $111 million. That's equivalent to $1 billion today. But, for the first time, Bond sees a drop at the box office. And it's not because the movies are getting worse, it's just that by 1967, there are Bond knockoffs everywhere. Even Columbia Pictures is putting out their own Casino Royale that same year. The market's saturated. Still, Bond is king. So, by 1967, Connery's done. Not talking to Broccoli, not interested in coming back, and suddenly they're looking at over 400 actors, basically anybody who'd ever been on screen in the Commonwealth. Even Timothy Dalton got asked, but at 25 he figured he was too young to take over from Connery, so they end up spotting George Lazenby, literally because they saw him in a Fry's chocolate cream ad. Movie comes out December 69, big premiere at the Odeon Leicester Square in London. Press was brutal. British papers loved calling Lazenby the Big Fry, just roasting him for that old chocolate ad. Reviews weren't much kinder either. A lot of people took shots at both the movie and Lazenby. Box office-wise, it opens strong in the US, $1.2 million for the week. Ends up making only half of what You Only Live Twice did in the UK. Still, it was one of the biggest hits of 1969. Globally, $82 million on a $7 million budget. A solid hit, but compared to the earlier films, it's a pretty big drop. You could feel Bond losing a little steam. People wanted Connery back. So, Lazenby's out, and the producers start testing new faces. But United Artists wants Connery back. Bad enough to give him a then-record $1.25 million paycheck to do it. They also tried to recapture that Goldfinger magic. Brought back director Guy Hamilton, tried to hit all the same notes. Diamonds Are Forever hit #1 in the US for 7 weeks straight, which is wild. Ended up with $116 million worldwide, $43 million from the US alone. Still, most people saw it as another just okay Bond movie. But Connery's return was a big enough deal that it outgrossed the previous 2 films. People just missed that original Bond swagger. Broccoli and Saltzman tried to get Connery back again, but he'd had enough. United Artists considered Steve McQueen, Paul Newman, even talked to Burt Reynolds. But Reynolds said no, Bond should be British. So they finally landed on Roger Moore, who had actually been on their radar since Dr. No and on Her Majesty's Secret Service. The last time they switched actors, it backfired. But Moore was a different story. Leave and Let Die dropped in June '73, $7 million budget, and made $161.8 million worldwide. Huge hit. Bond was back, no question. Now Bond's back on a roll, and the movies are coming out almost every year. The Man with the Golden Gun opened December '74. Originally, this one was supposed to come right after On Her Majesty's Secret Service, with Lazenby still playing Bond. Lazenby even told the media it was happening, then changed his mind and walked away. Director Guy Hamilton wanted to toughen Bond up, make him more like Fleming's original. Didn't really land with audiences. Budget was $7 million, but it only made $97.6 million worldwide, $21 million in the US and Canada. That made it the 4th lowest-grossing Bond movie ever. Between that and some behind-the-scenes drama, this came close to ending the franchise right there. The next entry did massive numbers again. The Spy Who Loved Me, $13.5 million budget, brings in $185 million worldwide, with $46 million from the US and Canada. Biggest Bond movie so far. What's kinda ironic here, Ian Fleming hated his own spy novel so much he wouldn't allow it to be published in paperback until after he died. Anyway, after the commercial and critical dip, Bond was suddenly peaking again. No surprise, this one and For Your Eyes Only ended up being Roger Moore's personal favorites from his run. He said so himself. Moonraker's one of those Bond movies people still talk about, usually for the wrong reasons. But you know what? It's got its fans. Doesn't matter what anyone says, it was a massive hit. Spielberg actually wanted to direct after Close Encounters, but Broccoli said no and stuck with Lewis Gilbert. Opening week in London, Moonraker breaks the record, 67,139 pounds, #1 in the city. Then, just 3 days later, it hits the US in 788 theaters, United Artists' biggest opening at the time. In the UK, it pulls in £10.7 million. Worldwide, it ends up grossing $210 million off a $34 million budget, which made it the biggest United Artists movie ever back then. Beat out The Spy Who Loved Me. So after Moonraker, United Artists gets hammered by the disaster that was Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate, plus there's an early 80s recession. Suddenly, Bond's budget gets slashed, For Your Eyes Only goes leaner and the crew changes up behind the scenes. But even with a smaller budget, it still opens huge. Odeon Leicester Square, new UK record for opening day at almost £15,000, pulls in £10.4 million in the UK. In the US and Canada, $54 million, and worldwide, $195 million. That makes it the second highest grossing Bond right after Moonraker. When it first came out, people weren't thrilled. But over time, For Your Eyes Only's reputation has actually improved, even if the reviews still bounce around. Even after the Heaven's Gate mess, United Artists goes for another Bond movie. Octopussy doesn't quite match the last one, but still hauls in $187.5 million worldwide, $67.8 million in the US and Canada alone. Honestly, most people rank this pretty low in the franchise, but it still put up solid numbers, especially considering the studio's shaky finances at the time. By now, Roger Moore is looking way too old to be running around as Bond. The movies are making money, but creatively, things are getting rough. A View to a Kill opens in May 1985, and critics are not having it. But at the box office, it's still the biggest opening for a Bond movie ever. $13.3 million across 1,500 theaters on Memorial Day weekend. Still, Rambo First Blood Part 2 takes the top spot that weekend with $25.2 million. Sean Connery straight up said, Bond should be played by an actor 33, 35 years old. I'm too old. Roger's too old too. Even Moore admitted later he stayed on way too long. I was only about 400 years too old for the part. Despite that, the film still made $152 million worldwide on a $30 million budget. But that was it for Moore. The era was over. Bond movies were still cash machines, but the formula was running out of steam. After Moore steps down, the producers are looking for a reset. The movies are still making bank, but something's got to change. They try to bring in Pierce Brosnan. He even does a screen test. Problem is, he's still tied up with Remington Steele, so they can't make it work. Enter Timothy Dalton. Broccoli was hesitant at first, mostly because Dalton didn't even seem interested, but after some convincing and a bit of schedule wrangling, Dalton takes the role. Right away, his take is nothing like Moore's. More serious, closer to what Fleming wrote. Dalton himself even says he wouldn't have taken the part if they'd wanted another Moore copy. Moore, for his part, just sits it out and doesn't even watch the new movie in theaters. The reaction to Dalton is split, and so are the movies. But numbers-wise, opening weekend in the US, $11 million. Beats The Lost Boys. Breaks the previous 3-day Bond record set by Octopussy. Doesn't top the 4-day Memorial Day record, but still strong. Final tally is $51.2 million in the US, $191 million worldwide, off a $40 million budget. Biggest Bond ever up to that point. Dalton's Bond era was off to a strong start, even if the fan base was divided. So, right after The Living Daylights, Broccoli and the writers are already hashing out the next one. This is also Dalton's last movie as Bond, which is kind of a shame. And yeah, you hear all sorts of theories about why he was done after 2, but let's talk numbers first. Here's what's wild. Even though License to Kill made more than 4 times its budget, this is actually the one Bond movie with the lowest profit margin. Adjusted for inflation, it's right at the bottom for box office returns out of all 25 official Bond films. Total gross is $156 million on a $32 million budget. In the US and Canada, it only pulled in $34.6 million. If you adjust for inflation, it's the lowest grossing Bond in North America. One of the big reasons? The competition. This came out the same summer as Lethal Weapon 2, Ghostbusters 2, Indiana Jones, and The Last Crusade, which, by the way, stars former Bond Sean Connery, and Batman. It was just a brutal year to try to get attention. Both Dalton Bond films have picked up a cult following over the years, especially for the darker tone. They're still a little divisive, but they stand out. Dalton only did 2, and he wasn't fired. And he didn't just walk away. They were even prepping a third Dalton film in 1990. There was a poster at Cannes, pre-production work was happening. But then everything fell apart. Broccoli split with screenwriter Richard Maybaum, and then the legal mess kicked in. Long story short, Dalton didn't come back for GoldenEye because after all the legal delays, his contract ran out and he just wasn't interested in a new multi-film deal. He would have maybe done one more, but the producers wanted more commitment. That's how Brosnan finally stepped in. So, by 1993, MGM's officially announcing Bond 17. Broccoli's health is failing by this point. He actually passes away 7 months after GoldenEye comes out, so Barbara Broccoli takes more of the reins. Dalton's out, and Brosnan finally gets the call. The only reason he didn't get the job back in the 80s was because he was tied up with Remington Steele. This time, he's in. Got paid $1.2 million out of a $60 million budget, and it paid off. GoldenEye was a big deal, both with critics and at the box office. Still seen as Brosnan's best Bond film, opened huge, $26 million opening weekend in the US across almost 2,700 theaters. UK opening is record-breaking, $5.5 million in a non-holiday week, third biggest ever behind Jurassic Park and Batman Forever. In terms of total box office, this was the fourth highest worldwide in 1995 and the biggest Bond movie since Moonraker, even if you adjust for inflation. Pulled in $356 million worldwide, with $106 million just from the US. After the late 80s dip, Bond was all the way back. After GoldenEye brought Bond roaring back, the pressure was on to keep the streak going. This was also the first Bond movie after Albert Broccoli passed away, and the film is actually dedicated to him. Martin Campbell didn't come back as director. He went off to do The Mask of Zorro. The response in '97 was a bit mixed at first, but it's aged well. A lot of people now talk about how Tomorrow Never Dies actually nailed a lot of the media tech stuff before it was cool. It opened in second place in North America, mainly because Titanic dropped the same weekend and just ate the whole box office alive. Still, Tomorrow Never Dies pulled in $25 million that weekend and overall grossed $339.5 million worldwide. It didn't quite top GoldenEye's $356 million, but it did even better at the US box office, pulling in $125 million domestically. So, not a step back at all. Then we get The World Is Not Enough. Joe Dante and Peter Jackson were both considered to direct. Barbara Broccoli actually liked Heavenly Creatures but saw The Frighteners and lost interest in Jackson, so he was out. The movie premiered November 1999, US and UK. Opened at number 1 in North America with a $35.5 million weekend. Held on to that top spot until Toy Story 2 came along. Finished at $361.7 million worldwide, $126 million in the States. Biggest Bond yet until Die Another Day came out. And even though these Brosnan-era films brought in new fans, thanks to all the 80s and 90s kids growing up with Bond, the series wasn't always hitting the quality mark, but the fan base just kept growing. After The World Is Not Enough, the producers tried to get Michael Apted back, then went after Tony Scott and John Woo. Both said no. Brosnan tossed out some names too: John McTiernan, Ang Lee, Martin Scorsese. He even chatted with Scorsese about it on a flight, but nothing came of it. In the US, it opened at number 1 with $47 million, biggest Bond opening yet, going up against Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets and the Santa Claus 2. Harry Potter and Die Another Day would both keep bouncing back to the number 1 spot at the box office for 6 months. They'd keep swapping that top spot until Finding Nemo finally joined them in June 2003. That's not something you see every day. Die Another Day finished with $432 million worldwide and became the 6th highest grossing film of 2002. And if you don't adjust for inflation, this was the top grossing Bond until Casino Royale came along. Now, some fans love the camp factor here, but for a lot of people this is basically the worst Bond movie. When The Bourne Identity came out that same year, Bond looked out of date overnight. Critics started hammering it, and honestly, if you look at most Bond rankings, this one's usually near the bottom. So by 2004, the franchise needed a reset. Neil Purvis and Robert Wade start working on a script, originally with Pierce Brosnan still in mind. There was even talk about bringing it back to Fleming's style, more grounded, less gadgets and CGI, and then you had Quentin Tarantino wanting to direct it. Eon shut that down quick. Tarantino wanted it set in the 60s, only with Brosnan. Didn't matter. Eon wasn't interested. Meanwhile, the studio decided Die Another Day had just gotten too over the top, too much fantasy, so they wanted to pull it back. That meant Martin Campbell, same director who'd done GoldenEye, came back to steer the ship. But Brosnan was out, and nobody saw it coming. There are a couple versions of how it happened, but Brosnan's own story is brutal. He's working in the Bahamas, gets a call from his agent, and suddenly it's done. Some say it was all about his salary, depends on who you ask. So, who's next? Michael G. Wilson claims over 200 names were considered. Martin Campbell says it really came down to Henry Cavill, who was only 22 and considered too young, and Daniel Craig. MGM and the producers eventually promised Craig the role. He actually turned them down at first, thought Bond was formulaic, but after reading the script, he changed his mind. Casino Royale premieres in London, 3 theaters at once. First Bond film ever shown in mainland China, and it pulls $11.7 million there alone. Opening weekend in the US, $14.7 million on day one, $40.8 million for the weekend, second only to Happy Feet. By the end of its run, it's $594 million worldwide on a $150 million budget. That's a massive return. It was the 4th highest grossing movie of 2006, and for a lot of people, the best Bond ever made. So you'd think after Casino Royale, they'd finally have some momentum, right? But Bond has always struggled with consistency, and Quantum of Solace is a perfect example of what happens when everything goes sideways at once. The film was shot across 6 different countries. Paul Haggis, who worked on the script, finished his draft just 2 hours before the 2007 Writers Guild strike began, and during the strike, they couldn't bring in any writers. Daniel Craig later admitted he ended up rewriting scenes himself. Forster, the director, was still unhappy with parts of the script, so he brought in Joshua Zechimer to tweak a few scenes. But honestly, nobody was ever really satisfied. Despite all the chaos, Quantum opened huge in the UK, £4.9 million on its first Friday, a record. Weekend total was £15.5 million, another record, beating Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. France and Sweden, same story, big numbers. In North America, 27 million opening day across more than 3,400 cinemas, 67.5 million for the opening weekend, ended up with 589.6 million worldwide. Next up, Skyfall. Now, this is where Bond needed a win, and that's exactly what happened. Development started in 2009, but then MGM nearly went bankrupt, so everything got put on hold for a year. Once MGM sorted itself out, production finally started, and they timed the release to line up with the 50th anniversary of Dr. No. And here's where marketing really kicked in. The 2012 Olympics. Their global attention didn't hurt Skyfall's box office at all. In the UK, Skyfall pulled in £20.1 million on its opening weekend. That made it the second biggest Friday to Sunday opening ever, just behind Harry Potter and The Deathly Hallows Part 2. By early November, it had already beaten The Dark Knight Rises to become the UK's highest-grossing film of 2012, and also the highest-grossing Bond film ever in the UK. In North America, Skyfall opened wider than any Bond before. $2.4 million just from midnight showings, $30.8 million on opening day, $88.4 million opening weekend. By the end of its run, it earned $304.4 million in the US and Canada, the 7th highest grossing film ever made at the time. Skyfall was a monster hit. Most fans and critics put it up there as one of the very best Bond movies. Hard to argue. After Skyfall, you'd think everyone would just want to cash in and move on, but it was a bit more complicated. Sam Mendes said he was out after Skyfall. He'd done his Bond movie. He was moving on. And then, a little time goes by, the right script comes along, and suddenly he's back in the chair. Mendes ends up being the first guy since John Glenn in the 80s to direct 2 Bond films in a row. Spectre pulled in $880.7 million worldwide, $200 million from North America. But the budget was insane. $300 million. And here's the thing, even though it was technically a huge box office hit, nobody really talks about Spectre anymore. It came and went. The reviews were mixed, Fans didn't really connect with it, and it's kind of faded into the background. And then radio silence. 6 years without a new Bond, longest gap since the wait between License to Kill and GoldenEye back in the 80s. No Time to Die spent years in production hell. Development started back in 2016. Danny Boyle was supposed to direct, but left over creative differences, and Cary Fukunaga came on board as director, the first American to direct a main Bond film and the first to get a writing credit. Production finally started in 2019. The release date moved 3 times before anyone even saw a trailer, and then the pandemic hit. All the Chinese marketing and the premiere were canceled. Cinemas started closing around the world. The studio had already sunk $66 million into promoting a film that nobody could go see. The delay cost MGM up to $50 million. If they'd actually released it in April 2020, estimates say they could have lost $300 million in box office. It didn't stop there. No Time to Die was pushed back again and again. It finally premiered in September 2021. The numbers looked strong at first glance. $119 million opening weekend from 54 countries. That's the biggest international opening since the start of COVID, and yes, it passed $100 million overseas without China. But the reality? It just wasn't enough. In the US, it made $160 million. Worldwide total was $774 million. But because of the ridiculous combined costs, at least $350 million, this movie needed at least $800 million to break even. The excuses were everywhere. COVID, long runtime, fewer showings, people still not comfortable coming back to theaters. But the bottom line is, for the first time since whatever a James Bond movie actually lost money. The franchise waited 6 years, poured hundreds of millions into a film, and it didn't break even at the box office.